started. We've all seen the shenanigans of the American leadership regime. And, well, everything is done for good. And we saw how they treated their ally, Zelensky. And I'm sure a lot of us are left baffled by what we actually seen there and on live TV. And I think if Francisco is there, Francisco is the right person to really tell us or inform us or what he actually saw, what was actually going on there, because I'm totally bemused. So, Francisco, if I'll turn over to you to inform us of what we saw on TV the other day. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thanks again for the invite. I wasn't baffled, I was shocked. And the reason why I was shocked, not because I expected different behavior from US imperialism, and certainly not from Trump. I was shocked because this was the horrible humiliation that had been done in public, in my view, deliberately. And that's what I was shocked about. I checked some of the Latin American newspapers before coming to the meeting, since yesterday and so on. And all of them are basically lamenting the horrible treatment that Zelensky was given by Trump and J.D. Vance. I think it comes down to this. This is what is coming out so far. Trump says that he wants all the rare earth and all the minerals from the Ukraine to be given as a contract of an agreement between the Ukraine government and the US government to US corporations. That is to say, the United States basically purchases the Ukraine. That's whatever is going to be left of it. I'll come back to that point in a second. And I got the impression from the conversation, from the altercation and the video that I watched several times, and I, got several panties around the place to get details. My impression was that Zelensky wanted some security, some guarantees in terms of US support, US military support, even the possibility of US troops, if it came to it. And my sense was that Trump and company were not prepared to give any. In other words, they wanted total and absolute surrender. And what it means is this, that now that Zelensky was treated that way, after the press conference, normally you don't discuss these things in public, you discuss them in private. But the schedule was that after the press conference and the altercation, there would be a lunch with all the people present invited, Zelensky, his team, Trump, and his cabinet.
Can I interrupt you just for a second, Francisco? There's some radio or some noise I'm hearing from someone, so maybe people can mute if they're not going to be speaking right now. I don't know where that noise was coming from, but it sounds like a radio or something, or an echo anyway. Thanks.
I think it's my own echo, because somebody's got the microphone on. Maybe it's Frank. Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay, so let's see whether that works. So what happens is that the lunch where they were going to discuss the details, coming to an agreement and so on, and so Zelensky was going to surrender, that was cancelled. And then worse, he was asked to leave the White House. And he left empty-handed. So now what I think is posed is this. The Trump government wants the Ukraine to agree to what they proposed publicly to Zelensky without guarantees of security of any kind. And that means that Zelensky is out. Either he's going to be out in one way or another. Maybe the Ukrainian parliament might take a decision, maybe he'll be pushed aside and so on, but he's served his purpose and been thrown as a piece of garbage to the dustbin. That's what it means. So that's number one conclusion. That's number one interpretation of it. The second thing, which I think is important to bear in mind, is the reason why Trump are absolutely desperate to get this sorted quickly is because of the overall strategy to sort out the peace with Russia in order to concentrate on China, which is what they want to do later on. And I think this means the following. Russia, on its own, single-handedly inflicted the worst possible defeat to NATO in the last 70 years. It is really massive. It's gigantic, and I think we're just beginning to absorb the reverberations of that. That's really, really big. And the reason why we know this is not only Russia is not in a hurry, it's just waiting. It's got all the controls. It's got all the time. It's got all the troops. It's got everything on their side. The United States are not going to intervene. They said so publicly. The Europeans are making noises, but it's not going to come too much, in my view. I think it's just nonsense, no more than that. It's really ridiculous because what it means for the US population, and this is the worst part of this comedy or this farce, in the United States, Trump appears as a peacemaker to many in the US population. And the Democrats, who are supposed to be the progressive ones, whatever we may think about that interpretation, that characterization, are the ones who want to continue the war. Europe, which is supposed to be the civilized part of the world, are the ones who want to continue the war. So this is completely confusing for many, many people. What Trump now is demanding, I think, is part of the overall strategy once the Russian-Ukrainian war is sorted, is demanding that the Europeans increase military expenditure by significant amount. He's demanding, we thought it was originally 2%, 2.5%, which is what Starmer is going to do here. Trump is demanding 5%. He's demanding that Europe rearms itself massively. And there is a calculation in some of the interpretation, which is the United States want to ensure that Europeans arm themselves to the teeth by buying weapons from the United States so to improve the economy of the United States. In other words, it's a purely economic maneuver. This is not correct. In my view, the United States is preparing the ground to ensure that its lucky allies, lucky in the sense of being, completely vassals, completely subordinated, they arm themselves to the teeth, and then they have a united front against the main enemy, as the United States is likely to say, well, the United States is going to identify later on. So, two final points, very briefly. First of all, we've been talking about the new geopolitics emerging. It's already here. The defeat of NATO is a clear indication that if you follow peaceful, collaborative development, everybody progresses, and the United States is desperate to stop that, which is known as multipolarity. China is the main driving force. And the United States, in order to stop it, is trying to wage war in every way it can. So this is what is posed. And it seems to me that we need to monitor the situation to know exactly how this is going to pan out later on. We'll see a significant amount of development, particularly outside the United States, but mainly in Europe, but also in the Ukraine itself. If I may, Frank, I want to put a name of somebody who has a fantastic interpretation. It's just a name you may want to look for interviews that he has been doing around the place. My view is that he's got the best interpretation of what has been going on. Is Jeffrey Sachs. He is a Nobel Prize of Economics. He has been advising the Europeans and the United States on many issues. He is quite an interesting character. He knows the situation extremely well. So any clip, particularly latest one after the farce in the White House, whatever interview that you watch that he is given, that will be extremely enlightening because he gives you the background, but also tells you what is going on right now. So I leave it there. I think it's good news, but dangerous moments are coming up.
Thank you for that, Francisco. Yeah, fortunately, I'm one of the people who can still get RT. I did see an interview by Jeffrey Sachs. Yeah, I'll give a little time to any. Is there any questions that anyone would like to put to without too much of a big interpretation? Or we have Steve.
Yeah, just to say that while all this has been going on, Marco Rubio has issued a threat to the Cuban medical delegations, threatening to take the visa rights away from anyone who collaborates with the Cuban medical. Yet another attack, not only on Cuba, but basically on everywhere that these have helped. Have you got anything to say about that?
I'll take several together, Frank, if that's okay, because it saves time.
All right, Joseph, you've got the floor. Unmute, Joseph.
Okay, one of the things with Trump and Van's drama on Friday was his repeating to Zelensky, "You're provoking World War III. You're provoking World War III." I would like to ask Francisco if he thinks there's anything that we could take from that. And also, briefly, can he tell us what the new administration in Montevideo means for us at this point in time? It's going to be installed today. Thank you.
Sorry, the new administration where? I didn't get that bit.
Montevideo, Uruguay.
Sorry. Yeah, it's just we say Montevideo. That's what I didn't get it.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's it. Those are the only two, Francisco.
Yeah. Marco Rubio has this plan for decades. He's been trying to destroy one of the, big prestige things that Cuba has. Cuba has more doctors in the world than the World Health Organization in all the countries take it together. Cuba has played a very heroic role fighting Ebola, sending teams all over the place. Whenever there is an earthquake somewhere, Pakistan, you name it, the Cubans are first to be there, particularly doctors. They have been contributing everywhere. 20,000 doctors in Venezuela, 10,000 doctors in Brazil. Now they're going to be 10,000 doctors in Mexico. They played a very significant role in terms of the Operation Miracle, where 4 or 5 million people were restored their eyesight when they were suffering cancer. So Rubio wants to destroy this very prestigious thing and try to demonize and complicate the operation of the Cuban authorities. What he will do it certainly in the United States. We'll see whether he gets away with it. I think Cuba is too prestigious and there are too many friends around the world for Rubio to be able to get away with it. He might be able to score a propaganda coup in the United States and among the right-wing friends that the United States has, but I doubt he's going to be able to stop it. We'll see what administrative message he takes. Cuba is already denounced, it's going to continue regardless. So that's number one. When it comes to the question of, by the way, Trump suspended the authorization to Chevron to continue to extract oil from Venezuela to sell in the world market, which was beneficial to Venezuela. Then he stopped it. He suspended the sanction. Then he allowed the Chevron to continue. Then he stopped it, and then he allowed it again. All of that in about 48 hours, which is a complete mess. Nobody knows what exactly he's up to. I think there are contending factions within the Trump cabinet, and there are different currents within the Republican Party who are fighting all over the place to see whether they can get their way of things. Trump, on the one hand, is pragmatic regarding certain things, but it's got to be ideological regarding other things. So therefore, he's prepared to contemplate their pressure. So he makes noises in one direction and then make noises in the opposite direction. When it comes to the question of the World War III, I hate to say this, but I think Trump was correct. Biden, throughout the 4 years that he was encouraging and fomenting the war in the Ukraine against Russia and mobilizing absolutely every European, sending weapons in by huge amounts, he was kept doing the following, breaking the red lines, crossing red lines, one after another, after another, after another, after another, to the point of, the possibility was very near that the United States, with their allies, could strike massively with bombs Moscow. And if that had been the case, the Russians have been very clear, if it comes to that, that is to say, where our national security is threatening that way, that gravely, then we will respond. And we will respond with everything we have. And the Biden administration also in coded language said we will respond in kind. And that meant an escalation, the possibility of an escalation leading to a nuclear war. And the Russians have a weapon which is called, I think in Spanish called the destello, which means something like lightning, or in Russian is oshrenik. I don't speak Russian, so forgive my pronunciation. Is a special bomb. They use it only once. And I think that stopped the possibility of the nuclear escalation. The velocity is 3 times the speed of sound, 3 times. So when it goes, there is no possibility, whatever, that you can stop it. None. And they use it only once to say, we don't want, and this is not a nuclear bomb, by the way. And the Russians said that information, that signal saying, we are ready, we are well equipped, we don't want a nuclear war, but if it comes to that, we'll use this. So let's hope that you rethink it. And in the meantime, Biden was defeated in the election, and then Donald Trump came to office, and things changed, as we've seen quite dramatically, with the humiliation of Zelensky. When it comes to Orsi, Yamandu Orsi is a left-wing president in Uruguay, Montevideo. Already Lula has invited him and his country, including Bolivia and Colombia, to join the BRICS. That is to say, to participate in the BRICS in the meeting, in the summit that is coming in June. So that's already an indication that although we, Latin America, try to organize ourselves and integrate ourselves economically, now we're doing via BRICS, which is easier because there is money, there is resources, technology, and so on. So it's extremely positive. And Orsi is in the same political party as President Mojica, who was the guy who was a Tupamaro guerrilla fighter and was in solitary confinement for about 5 years. I think the longest anybody has ever been. And then eventually he became the president several times. He's quite well respected internationally, even though occasionally he is controversial. So it's another win-win in Latin America, not a revolutionary one, but certainly a positive one. Similar politics to Petro in Colombia. So we have Mexico, we have Brazil, we have Uruguay, and we have Petro in Colombia. So things are not too bad in that sense. These are shaping up. And given that BRICS is around, we can always have an alternative. There is somebody else that is asking a question as well. I think Cecil.
Yes. Good afternoon. Just hopefully briefly, I think that the Ukraine-Russia war was provoked by the West. Moving NATO eastwards in the way that they did was both provocative and idiotic. I do not, however, think that the military outcome, or to date, represents any kind of a victory against NATO. A part of Russian territory is now occupied, and their Black Sea fleet has been shot to bits. We can leave that to one side. So it's not at all clear that that NATO has been defeated in any way. And if we go down that line, it actually follows what NATO wants us to do, which is to believe that somehow they are menaced by Russia, and that the great leap forward in armaments, which doesn't benefit anybody and which represents taking away of money for social services and aid and so on from the rest of the world, is actually a necessary or sensible line. And left-wingers and black people, it seems to me, shouldn't be saying that the Russians have defeated NATO, because that makes Russia the kind of menace that NATO is lyingly presenting it as. That's really my statement come question.
Can I come back very quickly? Yeah, I mean, Cecil, I entirely agree with you communicationally. I think we need to be very clear that we do not take a triumphalist view and then unwittingly, produce a message of just warned us against. I entirely agree with you. Nevertheless, objectively, if 40 countries gang up against one, throw all the military weapons that you can, of every imaginable kind for a very long time, with huge amount of resources in support, with the intention of breaking that nation that the war is waged against. And if you are able to resist 40 of them, it wasn't a full war in the traditional sense, but it was a real war. And remember, if Venezuela has been applying 930 sanctions, Russia has 15,000. The intention was to destroy it. And if you're not only are able to resist all of that, sustain it, improve your economy massively, defeat them, and then come out victorious and economically strengthened, with an economy which is, now is really beginning to thrive quite dramatically in alliance as part of the BRICS, then that's a clear defeat of NATO. But that doesn't mean to say that Russia is a threat or a menace that is going to start invading other countries. It didn't. It was a provocation organized by Biden, particularly not only by Biden, but it started with Clinton, actually. Let me summarize this point with one example, if I may. If, say, think for a second, were Russia to establish or install military bases and nuclear weapons, and the intention to install nuclear weapons in Mexico, you can imagine what the United States will do. It will go potty, as they did with the missile crisis in 1962. So this was very similar, actually worse, because already the country, Russia, was surrounded by a huge number of military bases all over the place, and there was provocation after provocation after provocation. And the one that actually brought the camels back was the one of the Ukraine being part of NATO. And that meant the possibility of the United States and NATO installing nuclear weapons, giving the first state capability to the Western imperialist alliance. And of course, the Russians will not countenance it. They make concession after concession. They try to seek for peace, a peace agreement. There were 3 attempts to do it, and Biden and company will not do it. And I think the reason why that section of the US bourgeoisie that Trump represents want to settle quickly is because they know that their defeat is quite significant. Of course, we need to present this in a way is understood and not misunderstood. I entirely agree with that particular point.
Thank you for that. Thank you for all the questions. And the propaganda and confusion war will continue. Okay, we'll move over now. Thank you very much, Francisco. We'll move over to Luke. Luke Daniels, the president of CLS, who has been for 40 years. Well, he'll tell you. And
Okay.
so, Luke, we'll move.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Frank. I think we move into another war now, which one is a secret silent war against women. You know, it's been going on for a very, very long time. And the last figures I've looked at for 2017 was 137 women killed every single day in the world, and millions, of course, abused. All the signs are women are in for a really tough time coming up this next period because the figures seem to be going up. And all the signs that I'm seeing about war, spending more on arms, spending more on war, it means that women will continue to be the collateral damage of war, as it were. We see in Gaza, 70% of those killed are women and children. We see the Sudan right now, how much rapes and killings of women. In every war, women suffer and children suffer quite a lot. And not only on the theater of war, they also suffer because research is showing that countries that are at war, domestic violence actually goes up in those countries. So if Britain is at war with the US, for instance, you know, it will go up. The incidence of violence will go up for women here. They also suffer again even at the end of war, because when veterans come home, there's a high proportion of them actually end up perpetrating violence against their partners. So all around, you know, women suffer when there's times of war. A dreadful situation. But today what I want to do is to talk about 20 minutes or so about domestic violence. I'll be using some slides to my PowerPoint, so we'll need to connect in a minute with share screen. Basically, I'm just putting up some headlines I'll speak to very quickly and move on in a quick fashion, so we can get to discuss the whole issue afterwards. So for about 20 minutes, if we could start screen share, and I'll put up a first slide in a minute. Now, the UN has actually been, you know, despite, and this violence that women are suffering is despite over 40 years, the United Nations has pumped more than 40 billion into ending violence against women and girls. And in some ways, very little has changed because the numbers have stayed almost the same. About 1 in 3, 1 in 4 women will face abuse at some point in their life. So there hasn't been a lot of change happening despite the amount of money that's being pumped in. Of course, they've done some good things. Almost all countries now have got some laws against domestic violence. But as we know, laws alone will not change things. It depends on what happens on the ground, what's the action on the ground happening. So although I think the laws are an important first step, there's a lot more needs to be done. One of the reasons I think that they're failing, and although they've provided a lot of directions to governments and so on, and said governments are responsible really for ending violence, the violence, and they've given them some guidelines and so on. When I look at the guidelines, I feel as though the guidelines do not go deep enough in terms of going to the roots of the problem and ending it. But we can't blame the UN for that in some ways, because the UN really is made up of the different countries, the governments, and there's some limits to which governments, some of the measures that need to happen, in my opinion, most governments would balk at and wouldn't want to subscribe to. For instance, you know, I think the socialization for violence is one of the key issues, and most governments still depend on men's violence. So when you got a state depend on men being violent, it's very hard to really end violence against women, because as Bell Hooks rightly said in her book, Feminist Theory from Margin to Center, that to end violence against women, we need to end all violence. So when we look at ending domestic violence, it involves also ending state violence, whether it's from the police, the army, or wherever it's coming from. And of course, violence comes in many forms, in terms of poverty and what's happening around social issues. Okay, I'll try to screen share now. I need to get up my, there we go. Okay, I didn't want to start there. Let me go to the top. Okay, have you got my, I can't see you now, Frank. Have you got this, my screen?
Nothing yet.
Can you hear me?
Nothing yet,
All
Luke.
right. Okay, because I haven't logged on to screen share. Let me do that now. Screen share, where is that screen share? Here we go. Share. Okay. That's not the screen I wanted to. Oh, there we go.
That's it. We're going.
Right. All right. There's that. Can you see that clearly?
Yeah, we see that now. All right.
And the violence against women and girls. That's up.
Yeah, men's
Okay,
work.
great. Thanks. Okay. I'll just speak to some of these very quickly. Now, for my work with perpetrators, three things I've noticed is that for almost all the men I've counseled, most of them be hit as children. For the ones who've been brutalized as children, they tended to be the ones who were the worst perpetrators, the ones who might break bones and so on. So we'll go to that level. But almost all the men I've counseled have been hit as children. All had sexist attitude and behavior. As a matter of fact, one of the first things in a first session I've often had to interrupt. There's the sexist language they might use because they're still angry. You know, it might be that B word or C word that will come up. And that has to be interrupted immediately and set good groundwork and guidelines as for how the session will go. The other thing that was crucial was the socialization for violence. Almost all of them had used violence on men as well. They'd been accustomed to using violence. So that was part of the makeup. Violence was okay to be used. So when the socialization was key. We'll spend some more time looking at the socialization by looking at some of the slides. But it's good to have a definition about domestic violence, about what it is we're talking about. I think most of us recognize it very easily. If a woman is upset and hurt and in pain or wounded, we know some violence has happened. I won't read this out, but I'll leave it there. I think people can get it and they record it when it comes up. But I think that it's important that we know what we're talking about, and that's the definition. Any act really that results in a woman being physically, sexually, or psychologically harmed. I'll move on. Men's work, and that's how we describe the work with perpetrators generally. When I first started way back, you know, there was some hostility from some quarters about the work, and this particular quote that you see up there is from Sandra Hurley. We were billed to speak at the same meeting, I remember once, and I was late getting to the venue and she'd already spoken. When I got there and spoke about the work with the perpetrators, I couldn't understand why, you know, people were just stammering to have another word with me because, and one said to me that Sandra left them feeling so hopeless. Basically, she'd come and say it's a waste of time working with men, lepers don't change their spots and that kind of stuff. And when I presented to them some of our successes in working with men and changing their attitude and behavior, it encouraged them. And it's surprising. This quotation is from not too long ago, some maybe nearly 40 years after she had been interrupting, rubbishing, and blocking men's work. We'll come back to men's work a little bit later. Now, one of the things I do is I check the newspapers almost every day, and just to see what's going on. And as I said, the picture really for women what's coming up in the next couple of years is not good. The gun violence. This was in today's Observer. It begins at 4 years old. And what they're looking at there is the way they can start to children in school already learning violence in many ways from the videos and stuff they're looking at. And they're trying to interrupt that by not excluding children from schools, which is, I think, a crucial part. If you push young people out of school if they fall into the wrong company, and the situation can only get worse. How children are treated. Pupils are in fear every day. This is the top school that children are going to, and some in Hackney. And some of the reports of, not only from parents and so on, and from doctors saying that children are traumatized. It's a strict regime, although they said the school has produced good results. It's at a cost. Children are feeling terrorized and pressured. And when I talked about the violence we do to children, this is part of it. If they're being terrorized in a school, it can only end up the bad results. I hate my school. And this is just from 3 articles in today's paper. I hate my school. Growing up would be killers. Well, what they're saying is children are starting to get groomed at an earlier age as well, seeing material that they really shouldn't be seeing, seeing deaths and seeing people being killed and all kinds of stuff. And they're actually linking it to some of the children who've committed some of those terrible acts outside. I don't know about people here, but if you've seen any of those violent video games, and we'll come up to them in a minute. So not only physical violence, but we see now sex also being, pornography is one of the issues that's coming up a lot in what children are seeing. And not only children, but adults, because there's more violent scenes than pornography, which is leading to more strangulations and other things that are happening. And some men who have killed are actually claiming that the sex gone bad or gone wrong. So we know there's a real danger with what's coming through it. On the whole, that it's so much more easily accessible. And we hear it with AI, many of us of the older generation will not able to even keep up with the stuff that is going down in terms of the technology and how it's developing, people being able to put people's faces and bodies and whatever it is to create images that are harmful and destructive for women. Okay, I'm coming on here to stereotyping. I mentioned the violence against women, but I didn't say much there about there's also violence towards men, and that has been on the increase. As a matter of fact, I'm saying 10 years, it's increased by threefold. And I've noticed over the years the amount of times we see there's more and more movies about women being violent, and we see more images of violent women, including boxing, which is one of the violent sports that research has shown that in some ways encourages violence because it's a highly rewarded sport. And they said when there's reward attached to the violence, it makes it more addictive in some ways. We know what's been going on for men for a very long time with boxing, and the stereotyping and imaging of men as violent contributes to men thinking this is the way men should be. Now, socialization for violence continues with these violent video games, and if people have got the time to go on the internet and just see the way in which especially the Americans, and I suspect most armies are using these games to recruit young men. There was a little trend at one time where men were refusing to join the army in the numbers they used to. For instance, in Germany, young men were choosing to go into rather than be conscripted to go into social work and so on. So the numbers have been falling. And I think in the States as well, and in Britain, there's been a problem with recruiting. Young men are getting smart and deciding, their future is not just to kill or be killed. So what they've done is with these modern warfare games, which are highly addictive, and which are often used by the military just before going into war to more or less to gee up the fighters to kill. And usually a bit of racism is always attached to it. You know, if you fight in the frogs or you fight in the wops or, you know, whatever names they attach to people, to dehumanize them, so it makes it easier to kill. Now, these games, as I said, are highly addictive, very popular. The Americans really got a whole reward system going with these games, and a lot of young men who actually get addicted to them eventually join the army. The army's actually using it now because they're using that technology in terms of drones and so on. You can sit in an office and fight a war now. So the skills they learn from these games is transferable to war. And more violent images of men, women, boxing, as I said. And, you know, and although we love Muhammad Ali, and some of us, you know, he played a particular role at the time, which was important. So you can't knock Ali in some ways, but then look how he ended up with Alzheimer's. So we know it does damage for men. So more violent images of women. Boxing lessons are good for you. Blanket tells the poor. And of course, we know recently around reparations movement, Cameron going to Jamaica and said, you know, oh, we'll build you a jail and a boxing ring. And that's his way of paying reparations. It continues. More and more films about boxing, Lord of the Ring, of the Swing. This one is, I think, just released. So it's not only just old stuff, but a lot of new things coming out. Keep stereotyping and socializing men to be violent. It's not useful. Guns and killing is what we expected of us. Okay, seem to have jumped a long way in my presentation, so I need to get back to where I was. If you hold with me, you won't be seeing all of these slides, they're just too much. Right. Okay. As I said, online is the new danger where a lot of the socialization is happening. This one is about men who are watching a lot of online stuff that is on the dark web and so on. And many are becoming killers. People are beheading people now and that kind of stuff, and more and more violent acts. The youth violence I feel that we experience in the UK and other places at the moment, I really think it's because of the way they get desensitized to watching these games. And a lot of these young men, when you're excluded from school, they spend hours, spend days watching violence, a lot of violence. They get desensitized. It becomes easy to kill. And these are things that only the government really can intervene. Okay, I mentioned that the sexism really as one of the key things as well that is pushing violence against women. And look at this report coming out from the UN. 9 in 10 people have a bias against women. So we know it's a deep-seated problem and needs to be challenged. Okay, the figures I mentioned a bit earlier. So we will look at that one. Now, treat women as less than, you pay them less. Same to do with race. The gap between black and white workers is different, just as the gap between women and men. Hatred and killing of women continues throughout the world. Femicide in Kenya, we see. We know this was happening in Latin America and the Caribbean for some time. Right, so my argument really is that socialization plays a key role in men's violence, and we've got to end that socialization. How do we go about really changing it? And I think it's the government that has some big responsibility around it. For instance, in some of the Scandinavian countries where they've outlawed violence against children, there's been less violence and crime in those countries, and remarkably so, a huge drop in against violence against women in some of the countries. But still, the British government refuses to outlaw violence against children. Although Scotland and Wales just recently have outlawed violence against children. But it's something about Britain that just treats children really badly when you think about the two-child policy and other measures that are there that, you know, leaves children in poverty. For one of the richest countries in the world, our children, vast amounts of children still live in poverty. So I'm not very encouraged by the figures really as to how things will change for women if the measures that the government is taking is more like what I call gimmicks really in some ways. And as a result of the failed criminal justice system. Now, feminists have been arguing for some time that the violence against women is as a result of the patriarchy system that we live under, and inequality. Gender inequality is two key things that they said that needs to change. Now, most of us, you know, forgotten about patriarchy in many ways, or when we think about it, we think about the Bible and we think there's something in biblical times. But actually, patriarchy is very much alive and well. Men still control most of the social, political, and economic spaces, own most of the wealth. I'll keep going down.
Sorry to intervene, Luke, but
come in.
there is people saying could you improve on the size of the slides and make it a bit big?
I think so. Yes, I think. Yeah, I think I can do. But I wasn't really intending.
If you click, sorry, if you click this little screen, move the cursor the other way. No, the first one, the last one of the icons where you were.
Yeah,
the next one, the next one. Two more. No, the other way.
The other way, notes.
More the other way.
No, okay. The other way from notes.
The other way from where you are.
All right. Okay, but this is this one. That's normal.
Last
okay.
One. No, one more. More. One more. That one. That right. One that this looks like a little screen. Click there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we learn as we go. But I've lost my
There you go.
Okay, I think I can do this. Okay, great. Okay. Misogyny to be treated like terrorism. Now, this is a particularly worrying development. Now, within the feminist movement, I think the radical feminists have moved away from the criminal justice system approach and saying that there needs to be another approach to ending violence against women. But who have captured the space, as it were, is what they call the carceral feminists who think that locking up men for longer times is the way to go. But we know already that most jails are full to bursting, already releasing people. You know, if they should lock up even a fraction of the 2 million that commit offenses every year, you know, it's not sustainable. So we got to really find the real cause of the problem and try to fix it. As I mentioned, the UN earlier, they've come up with some good points for governments and things for them to do, but they haven't come up with a real theory and practice as to how to end violence. And most governments shy away from actually going to the root of the problem because the measures that they have to undertake, most of them would not do it. I think there's a chance that, you know, in a sense, no capitalist country, I feel, would do it. We need to remember that the first country to actually make violence against women a crime was the Soviet Union. They actually recognized women's rights as human rights. But even those gains, when they're made, they have to be fought to be kept, as we see has happened in the United States with Roe versus Wade. Women 50 years ago, had control of the bodies in terms of, if they wanted an abortion or not. That was their decision. But these things can be reversed, and as we see with Putin, it's being reversed. He's almost legalized violence against women now. And we see in the United States the reversal. But people are fighting back, of course. So for these governments, it's difficult. They still depend, as I said, on men fighting wars, so they don't want to, they wouldn't want to curtail the violent games as much as they should do, because they know that's the best tool for recruiting and socializing young men into being violent. So they come up with gimmicks all the time. I call it gimmicks. Even they call it gimmicks. They criticize each other. Conservatives blame the Labour Party when they're in power for coming up with gimmicks, and the Labour Party does the same. Because most times they're not looking to really change anything fundamentally. Even the police encourage acts we're calling sexism. And as we know, the police force themselves, and we've seen the horrific murders some police have committed, and this force is being declared sexist and misogynist and racist, I should remind people. Schools are coming up. This is after the murder. Sorry, I'm just going to speak to it. This is after the murder of a young woman in Plymouth, that the city decided that they will train young men to be bystanders, as it were, to stand up if they see, a woman is being abused. Clare's Law, that was one that was brought in because a woman was killed. Another gimmick in many ways, because there's a criticism of it. They never follow through. Okay, that's how my work. I'm looking for the roots of violence against women. As I said, it's been going on for as long as for thousands of years. And I think that much of it probably started with incest. When you think about it, for nations or places with populated, incest was pretty common. And a lot of research is showing that, especially with the new DNA testing facilities that we have, many people, when they're trying to track family and so on, find out that incest was about. And here, this was from a community of Neanderthal. From the DNA testing of some bones that found in a cave, most were related. So incest was something that was going on for thousands of years. And it's persistent because recently in France, they had to try and pass a law against incest. Australia, other countries, other communities. It's still widespread worldwide, in the Caribbean, in other parts of the world. Incest is still there. What that says is that it's very hard to change a kind of culture on some of these bad behaviors. Violence has been going on and been legalized in Mesopotamia some 4,000 years ago. And from then it spread to all sections of the world, all over the world, and it's and it's there, and it's a big issue. So we have to tackle patriarchy if we actually going to change anything. And we see it manifested in this country, for instance, in terms of how many women are in government or in positions of power, and how long it will take for that to change, for there to be parity. The inequality persists. And it's dangerous for women's life, because some of the research coming out of the whole issue around when we had the COVID-19, the decisions that were made at the time affected women most. And more women lost their lives, or, ended up working much harder in terms of, housework and caring work. So we know those happens. Okay, when you get government ministers defending smacking, there's no way things are going to change. Angela Davis. Now, why is Angela Davis there? Okay, we'll come back. Lammy, all for smacking. As a matter of fact, after the uprising in Tottenham, he came out and said this, that the smacking ban led to the riots because parents can't get to beat up on the children. Some figures. Okay, you've seen some of these. Okay, the imprisonment, you know, people put in prison are treated really badly, suicide and violence, drug addiction, domestic abuse on the increase, angry campaigners. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there with the slides. I just wanted you to get a flavor of what the headlines are and what's happening. And could come back to, now, how do I get out of this?
Okay, Luke.
Control, huh? Let me see if I can get out of this.
There should be a small screen at the top of your page.
I'm looking for it. Okay, let me see.
You click on the screen, it expands.
This one? No, not that one. I clicked the wrong one. Sorry. Let me click that one off. This one must need to go as well. It's
If
not
you want
going.
to get out, go to share in the little screen at the
Ah,
bottom.
right.
Click there, you'll come out. Can you see what it says? It says participant chat react share. Click the share.
That's at the top.
No, at the bottom. There you go.
That's it.
Okay. Stop
Okay.
share.
Thanks for that, Luke.
Okay, be back. Okay. Yes. I think I can stop there. We can maybe get some questions. There's just so much more to go through, but the time I think will be against us.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So any questions?
So is there any questions that come up? And Luke, I hope when you're answering the questions, you can find a little space somewhere to tell us how you started on this journey and how you got to there for 40 years, you know. Okay, I see Joseph's hands up. Crystal, okay. All right, we're getting some more. Yes, Luke.
You wondering?
Just tell us how you started on this journey for 40 years and
Thanks, Frank. I mean, it's a classic question I get asked most times from the time I've started doing this work, and most meetings I speak at, people say, you know, why are you doing this work? And the other one, apart from being attacked sometimes by some women actually on television, how can you be defending these men or supporting them? Is just excuses to make them strong. But the reason I actually got involved with it is because I'd been married for 10 years and I actually hit my wife, something which I'd slapped or something which I promised I would never do. As a result, you know, I felt quite depressed about it because, you know, my growing up, you know, my dad always said, you know, men who with women were cowards, and you know, something we mustn't do. I mean, I'd seen women beaten in the streets, you know, you grew up in the village and stuff like this, you see women beaten in the streets, you hear them being beaten in their homes. It's something that was very prevalent. And I promised myself it's something I wouldn't, you know, be doing. So when it happened, I was quite shocked actually that I'd done it. But and so I got depressed a little bit about it. And so I started a counselor. I got a counselor, and I think from the sessions I realized that partly was because of the socialization for violence played a key part in it. And I grew up in one of the roughest villages in Guyana. You had to learn to fight to survive. You know, you didn't, you know, so fighting was a big part of our growing up. So using violence was something that was, you know, came easy really in some ways. And I decided at that time, well, you know, I would now use that socialization in a positive way, which is to interrupt men's violence anytime I saw it happening. And I kind of made that decision within that counseling session, promised myself before I hardly had time to reflect on it, I was presented with a situation which I've written about in my book in Brixton, actually, out with a friend. And there was a woman on the pavement, a man standing above her, and I straight away realized that this was some kind of violence happening. So I went over quickly, tried to check out the woman to see that she was okay. She was on the floor. Whilst this guy was having a row with the crowd nearby. The woman was terrified, and she begged me, don't let the man take her away. So when I got up, eventually he told me, who the F are you? He said to me, are you doctor or something? And I kind of signaled, like, hold up. And I keep talking to the woman. And so then when I stood up now, we were eyeball to eyeball. You're trying to take my woman, and, he was ready to fight me. But we were close up. And I think he realized he couldn't intimidate me. And so eventually backed off. Police pulled up a little bit after and arrested him for possessing a dangerous weapon. He'd actually pulled a knife in the crowd that had tried to intervene. I intervened about 6 times in about 6 months after that, in pubs and in the streets. You're surprised how much of it happens. And then eventually a job opened up at the Everyman Center in Brixton, was just starting up, and they wanted a black counselor. I applied and I got the job, and that was it. Took me on a journey. Yeah. So that's how I got into this work. Thank you.
I see, Joseph, your hands up. Is that historical, or you mean to put your hands up? If so,
no, I meant to put it up.
Chair, my hand is up.
Okay.
I haven't got it. You can't see it.
Joseph.
Yeah.
Hello, because the topic is very, very dear to me. And having worked in a facility mainly with boys who was abused, both in the family and also community and schools and so on. And the insight I got from working there led me to believe that the violence is cyclical. It is something that is socialized and so on. There's a lot of work we need to do as a world, as a people, as a nation. But a number of things we need to consider. The breakdown of the so-called traditional society, and not thinking about so much the patriarchal part of it, but where, there was this structure in society where, some level of restraint could have been imposed on violent people. Now it's not there. I want to raise issues like quickly about the role of religion, especially the fundamentalists who seek to perpetrate the dominance of male over female, and of course we still have God as exclusively as a male. And the frequency of a harsh weather system nowadays with climate change and so on. About 2 years ago, I organized a webinar, and one of the contributors said that he did some studies in the Caribbean, and already they have been able to associate violence, even the spreading of violence. And they said that some of the people from Jamaica went to Antigua and so on, and those who were engaged in violence and actually experienced some of the hurricanes that passed through Jamaica. So we have all of these things to deal with. Plus, the use of alcohol and drugs, the glorification and celebration of those things is really something that we need to arrest, because even especially alcohol and cigarettes are being targeted towards women more than any other sector right now. All of these things we need to deal with, because it's almost seems to be overwhelming. But as you respond to some of those things I mentioned, Luke? Thank you.
Yes. I think I think some new research is coming out as well that shows that heat affects people recently. With the heat waves that have been happening in Africa and other places, that violence levels actually went up, including domestic violence. People get frustrated and hot and bothered or whatever, but anyway, it contributed the researcher felt in some ways to the increase in domestic violence. When it comes to alcohol, I'm a little bit more different on it because actually for most of the men I've counseled, there wasn't a problem with alcohol. You know, some of them had used alcohol, but for most of the men I actually counseled, they weren't drunk at the time. And for the ones that actually use alcohol, I think they were actually using it as an enabler or as an excuse to say, oh, I was drunk or something has gone on. So I think alcohol abuse is a real problem, around the world, most countries. Um, and I think, it creates health problems and bad behavior, in some cases, antisocial behavior. But in the instance of the domestic violence, I wouldn't say that it really was a key factor. But I'm sure there's, levels of violence happening because people are not in the right mind, as it were. If you take drugs, mind-altering substances, as they put it, is why in the groups that I did, because we did like a 12-month program, sorry, a 6-month program for perpetrators. And I included different issues to help men really to change their attitude and behavior. And I just did a section on alcohol. And if some of the men were addicted, we refer them to projects so they can get that support. But it does play a little part. But the key thing is patriarchy. And as you said, most religions are patriotic, not patriotic, but patriarchic, and they've got, men as the head of the household and should be in charge. And they exercise that power. And there's where men and boys learn that or feel that they should be in control. They've almost made controlling behavior separate offense from domestic violence. What's a part of domestic violence? The key element of it, really, because when you think about controlling, we learn controlling behavior, all of us learn controlling behavior, get controlling one way or the other. When you think about our childhoods, don't eat this, don't sleep this time, get up this time, a lot of control happens. And if it gets excessive, people will develop patterns of controlling behavior, which tends to dominate in the relationships. Um, um, and so it is a key factor and a key problem that needs addressed. But I think women can have some role to play in terms of interrupting that behavior, because even mothers would put preference for the boys, treat the boys separately and differently. And so it leaves that impression that boys are more valuable than girls. One of the things that when we stood up at the street corners, I remember in Ghana, we often discuss, boys is chatting and older boys. Often one of the questions posed was, if you had a boy, a son and a daughter, and you could only afford to send one to school, which one would you send? Which one would go to school? Most people would say, the boy goes to school. I, from an early age, felt that it was important for the girl to get the preferential, to get the education, because, I could see the violence around me. And I know that if a woman had the economic security and a job, she could leave a violent relationship. And I had sisters, right? So I thought about it in that sense. But for most people, they thought the boy should be educated. Anyway, thanks for your question. We've got another hand up, Christelle from
Christelle,
Colombia.
we go to Tony.
Yeah.
Tony will come after Crystal.
Hi, good afternoon. Firstly, thank you for
Hello.
organizing webinar. It's my first time here. A friend of mine told me about this, so I was really looking forward to it because of the topic, which is a very important topic, and I'm very happy to see so many men engaging in this discussion, seeing as we are in a patriarch. So just to introduce myself, my name is Christelle Tulia. I am British Congolese. I'm from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I've been residing here in the UK for almost 30 years. I understand that the webinar is focused around domestic violence, but I wanted to see if we can broaden the scope of the conversation which I'm not too sure if you are aware of. Well, most of you may be aware of the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is predominantly a French-speaking country. So I understand that we may have as much representation in various rooms and various discussions. So I would love to be that voice today for the Congolese. Currently, there is a crisis happening in Eastern Congo. There is an invasion, a war that is happening, which I'm not going to lean on the politics because this is not a political conversation. What I did want to highlight is to humanize the experience for women. If you're not aware, DRC is the rape capital of the world. And for many years, if I even say pertaining this war in itself, being that it's been going on for 30 years within that region, rape is used as a tool for control, a tool against, obviously, violence against women. And it's not really being discussed. And I wanted to see if we can share the spotlight on that. So my question is, with regards to topics such as rape and rape being used in a lot of conflict zones, not just in the DRC, South Sudan as well, as a weapon of war, being British Congolese first generation here in the diaspora, how can we raise awareness about this plight, whether it's at grassroots and strategic levels? So that's my question for yourselves.
Thank you. I guess one of the ways we raise awareness we're doing right now in some ways, Christelle, and thanks really for your question, because it's a big one. And it's one that
my hand is up, although I can't. It's Tony.
Okay, Tony.
Can you hear me? Your question in the chat. So after Lucas finished answering, Christelle, you can come in.
Yeah. Yes. Now, rape has been a weapon of war for time immemorial. It's always been, used during prehistoric times, right down. So one of the consequences of war really is rape. Men try to humiliate other men by raping the women, and if possibly impregnating them. It creates huge problems. And we know in many societies and communities, if a woman is raped, she gets treated double badly because her community then rejects her. And we know this happens probably in the Congo and other parts of Africa, in many conflict areas. So women suffered doubly during wartime. And it's an issue that can only be tackled by education, I think, and one of the things is raising awareness, really. Well, the first thing is, we need to be anti-war. There shouldn't be, we need to put an end to this, because, I've said, men have been fighting wars from, the short history. The world is one of wars, really, and it's meant fighting. And if we bother with Trump and Starmer and the others, we will be fighting forever. We fought on land, we fought at sea, in the air, and soon they want us fighting in space, using all kind of technologies and so on. So one is socialization for men, needs to end that. Now to tackle rape is a big issue, especially around war, and because many men get away with it, the legal system often does not protect women where there's a laws. And we see right here in the UK where rape cases hardly come to court, only a fraction of them come to court. And, but we live in that kind of culture, when the police are, many have been arrested for rape or thrown out of the force for rape or raped and killed women. We know we got a rape problem in society. I think we just got to keep speaking out and against rape. Thank you for your question. And if there's any way, and we really appreciate that you have joined this Zoom meeting, and that you continue to engage with us, because we feel, violence against women is crucial. They make up over half of the world's population, and are treated really badly throughout the world, and we can only keep raising people's awareness. One of the things, I always get asked,
black men more violent. I spoke at one meeting, and this was challenged by a black woman, because when I said that, there's black men are not more violent than anybody else, but I think not inherently violent, but I think the socialization that black men have been through, in terms of colonialism and enslavement, we have suffered more brutal situations, and people talk about the intergenerational trauma, and these behaviors are passed on. For instance, I grew up in Guyana, and I remember getting a beating and going to complain to my next door neighbor, who was a very aged woman. That time, I think maybe she was in her 80s, probably the daughter of a slave or the granddaughter, the very least, of a slave. She said we were lucky because not only was she beaten, she was put to kneel on a grater in the hot sun. I've seen children burnt with flame and burnt with oil as punishment for stealing. And you wonder where these kinds of mistreatment come from. I've seen, a whole house being beaten at the same time. And this happened in many households when I grew up in Guyana, that you would hear all the children being beaten. Sometimes, the beating is saved up for the weekend, and one day will come, the parents have been angry throughout the week. And then your final day, you almost the kind of treatment that happened during enslavement, when the slaves were just beaten to let them know who was the master and who was in control and in charge, that collective beating kind of behavior. So yes, we have suffered as a result of colonialism, and enslavement, and it's affected us deeply. And for that reason, that the global South is the most violent region in the world as compared to women. And so that, and black women generally, because wherever they find themselves, whether it's in the United States of America, more black women are killed than white women. In the UK, more black women are killed more than white women, and you get that kind of stuff that's happening. I'm not sure about the UK, but the percentage wise in terms of percentage of people, black women suffer proportionately, higher levels of violence than white women. And I think much of that is a result of the mistreatments during enslavement and colonialism. Thanks. Tony
Thank
wanted
you,
to come in.
Luke. I think Tony's question is kind of related to.
It's a follow on from that. I mean,
Yeah.
I say how pleased I am to be back again and being able to go to CLS meetings. It's a real joy. Yes, it's common ground, and it'll clearly be a part of any submissions or reporting that we make in the reparations framework, that the violence, brutality, the crashing of families, the lack of any family life for children, all those things will be a major part of the reparations topic. What I am finding difficult as we plan submissions is that it's not clear what programs you would recommend. Assuming that we are entitled to a very large amount, more money than is coming in the aid programs, a very substantial amount of money for reparation. How would you spend it? There's no panacea. I know it's hard work.
Yeah.
But what are the facilities that you would say were important to try to get a nationwide or Caribbean-wide response which works to the campaign against violence?
Yes. Yes. Thanks for that, Tony. I think it's really important. Okay, around domestic violence, I think so far, it's been merely seen as a woman's issue. And this is, I think, has hampered in some ways the development of a good strategy in dealing with ending violence against women. There needs to be more work with the perpetrators. And there needs to be more projects. There needs to be people, men trained, because, my writings, I usually put as men's work as a subtitle, because I think by taking responsibility for violence, we can start to begin to end it. This counseling perpetrators, usually when I'm working with them, they generally want to blame the woman for the problem. And that's how most will come to a session. If only she'd not done this or done that, if only she'd put the milk into the tea first or after it was poured or something, it wouldn't have led to violence. And if men are not accepting responsibility for the violence, there's no way they will change. So I usually took for some men, it took several sessions before they could begin to accept that, their hand didn't move without their brain sending a message, and that it's not the woman's fault, and that if they continue to blame the woman for the violence, there's no way they're actually going to change. So I spent a great deal of time working with them to get them to accept responsibility. Having said that, it's also important to give them the space to see the way in which they were socialized into violence. And most of them were beaten, and some very badly. One guy was telling me how great his dad was and his growing up was, and then almost in the next sentence, he was telling me about being whipped because he had rode the pig, but he thought it was, he jumped on the pig to ride it, and his father had warned him he mustn't. And he got a beating for that, but he felt it was justified because he did do as he was told. And this is the same man who was trying to blame a woman for his violence because she didn't do as she was told. He hit her. Yes, so I think the way they're right, we need projects, Tony. I think, and there's projects and there's projects. I must say, and I've seen some council where there's no political content in the approach to ending violence against women. And I think those are weak projects.
But I had
there's some people. There's some people who try to locate the violence into individual men, but usually it's a societal thing, and we have to look at the whole society and what's happening. And so my approach to ending violence against women is seeing it as a political issue, and it needs political solutions. If governments don't take on the responsibility to end it, and most wouldn't, my program is, I recognize as being too radical for most governments to take on, because I would say you need to end all violence, you need to end state violence. Most states don't want to hear that. Right now, with the amount of money that's being spent on arms in the worldwide, and talking about increasing, it can only make things worse for women. So there's projects that don't take the approach of a political slant to it, and these are the ones that the government are more happy to work with. So you're working with the individual men. I almost gave up on the work in the sense that I'm more right about it than actually do the physical work, because I recognize that if I'm helping, let's say, 50 men in a year, another maybe 15,000 became perpetrators, or if not 50,000 became perpetrators that same year. So it's about going after the root cause of the problems. And as feminists have long argued, and that's about patriarchy, how do you end the patriarchy? Some countries have actually tried to get more gender equal, and some African countries, especially, and some Latin American countries like Nicaragua, Venezuela, they've enacted laws that says, it's got to be 50% women in parliament and 50% women in government and other works and so on, in positions of power. And that's made a huge difference already in some ways. But it's not the only solution, because if men have been damaged and hurt, they need to be counseled and supported to change the attitude and behavior. That depends on how those projects work. Tony, I think it will be a lot of training, a lot of projects to be set up around the country, around the islands, around the region, to tackle this problem. It's a huge one. There's got to be, the laws have got to be in place, and the gender equality needs to be looked at. Women must feel that they can be safe and protected by the government. There needs to be resources for women, and even in a rich country like the UK, we saw that there are no spaces in refuge for women, in refuges, for women who are fleeing domestic violence. When they start to cut the spend on arms, and they ignore spending on setting up safe spaces for women, and making sure that there's support for men as well. Even the government minister came out with our 5-point plan to ending violence against women. Did not include any work with perpetrators. And although I advocate for work with perpetrators, I know that the most important work really is the political, and how do you do the prevention. And one is you stop children from being hit, so they don't learn that using violence is okay, and you prevent that. There's got to be restrictions on these horrible violent games and videos and even movies that are there socializing men into using violence. So the kind of measures that need to happen mostly in our
And can I
neoliberal
just
countries won't entertain. Yeah,
can I just
thanks,
add one
Tony.
one
That does
one?
answer.
As well as dealing with the negative, our teaching also goes to the positive, the joy of equal relationships. I wrote a piece about this, and I was going to read it on Women's Day. Can I give you 2 sentences?
Oh, you can
Okay.
read. Yes, we can listen to you for a minute, Tony. Yeah, let's hear it, because only a couple of sentences. Yeah.
Well, I talk
Yeah.
about the situation, which I won't repeat.
I think now is a good opportunity, because this is the only meeting on, well, it's not the only meeting, but for this month, this is our first meeting, and it's on.
And I wanted to do a tribute to Christelle.
Go on then, please.
This development, this is the liberation of women, is treated by some men as presenting a crisis for the Jamaican male. In a way, this is right, for demands for freedom always cause a crisis for the oppressors. But the crisis is so simple to resolve. Once men are able to accept the concept of equality and justice in their personal lives, equal respect for each other's views, equal rights to a career, equal responsibilities towards children, and equal say in sexual activity or non-activity, and a total end to violence, they will find that a new and joyous world will open to them. Then I say, the prospect of real equality is a challenge to be grasped eagerly by men as well as by women. So many men are blind to the real beauty of their women. The beauty of a woman lies in the interweaving of her mental brilliance, her bodily form, and her spiritual fire. Men who simply pant after the body are doomed to fail. They disrespect the mind and may never reach the spirit. End of quote.
Wow. Thank you very much. And I know that's from your book, The Passionate Advocate. So thank you, Tony. I've got a copy here myself, and I will look at it again. Thanks for that very powerful reading. But it does, yes, it speaks to that problem about equal relationships, and I think it's in all men's interests to really put an end to patriarchy. There can be no real equal and relationships happening unless we address the problems of patriarchy. And so it's in our interest to put an end to it. Our lives will be much better as men. So, yeah. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, there's
Frank?
Campbell has
Yeah,
a
we've got we've got one last question from Pamela. Could you go ahead?
Yeah, I was thinking that in the UK, for quite a while now, the government has rolled out parenting courses designed to get families to work better, to work together, and decrease violence. But I'm actually wondering whether we shouldn't be thinking of as four-year-olds are perpetrating violence, already learning violence. Why couldn't we have in nurseries, in classrooms, programs that are designed to respect? So for the boys to respect the girls and girls to know their value and their worth. And I think, but you have to start very early. It's one thing trying to mend people or change people when they're much older to stop the violence. But if in the first place we lay the foundation where I'm not saying it's going to take everything away or they're going to become, perfect overnight, but it's a start. We start with the very young and get that into their minds. And I think if we begin to enact some kind of change. And I'm like I said, these parenting courses that have been rolled out in the UK to some extent have been quite successful. And I think something like that, starting in nurseries, starting in classrooms, very young classrooms, would, I think, make a difference. So I
Yes.
don't know what you think about that.
I think that's really good, and I think that's been proven many times. I mean, the Short Start programs and different things that were in place that were cut by governments made a huge difference. We've got to really invest in our children, and parents need support. They need finances, they need resources, they need support to raise children. And in Africa, as I said, it takes a village to raise a child, and this is the approach they really need in terms of child rearing. And of course, most of the problems begin there in childhood. And if we can actually support and encourage parenting and parents, it will make a huge difference in the world. There is some research in one of the Scandinavian countries where they've actually turned around things in about 40 years because of ending violence, outlawing violence against children. We know it can work. We know it can make a difference. But unfortunately, I think, is why I like to also have a world view of it in a sense. And one is that, living in capitalist societies, they actually depend on inequality. Some workers have got to be paid less, and we see what is happening is that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer continually. It's part of the whole inequality. So you treat people as less than, and some others benefit, and they're doing well, but you create lots of problems in society. How do you change your whole society? And, in some ways, that's the whole problem. And I actually feel that, it will be a long time before many of our governments will be ready to do the kind of fundamental changes that are needed in society to bring about real change. And it's why in my latest book I'm working on, I'm actually, calling really on men, especially, to each one stop one. That if each one of us actually, if each man actually said to your brother, or your friend, or whoever it is, and encourage them to stop, support them to stop their violence, it would make a huge difference. And, I think there's a role for parents, very crucial in this, because if parents can raise children that, girls do the same thing that boys do, and, there's no preferential treatment. Girls, you learn to climb trees and boys learn to bake cakes. It would start to bring about some kind of balance in society, that no one is determined. The life chances are not determined by the gender or the life opportunities and the things that they do. So yes, it's a place to start. And it's the best place. And I actually argue that we can end this violence against women in 10 years. It takes in my estimation, it takes about 10 years to produce a perpetrator. You know, boys don't come into this world thinking, wait, I can't wait to grow up to beat up on women. You know, and by the way, you know, it really is still a minority of men who perpetrate violence, because you know it really is a minority of men. So we need to really appreciate as well. There's lots of men who are non-violent and don't perpetrate violence against women, and also to recognize that it's not only men who perpetrate violence. There's lots of women, and increasingly so, as we see the socialization for violence for women continuing in terms of, well, you can box, we can box as well. You know, you can go and kill in war, we can go kill in war too. And of course, it
We got one
suits
more.
capitalism. Huh?
One more question before we finish. So
yeah, go.
yeah. Oh, H Tweed's hand was up, but it's down now. So it's. Do you want to carry on with the question?
Hi there. Yes, please. If you don't mind, I'm
Hi,
gonna
Tweed.
hide. Hi.
How?
Thank you.
Hi, good.
If you don't mind, I'm gonna hide behind the. I'm not going to turn the camera on.
That,
okay, just quickly.
That's all right.
Thank you very much. Just quickly share what I get back from a lot of indigenous women's like matriarchal and matrilineal societies that are recovering their practices, you know, from colonialism and patriarchal everything you've mentioned, really, and that's about in a wider kind of sense, is violence against animals, insects, violence against the land, which includes mining and extractive practices, which you know would come under colonization, and it's to change the change the mindset of people of society to understand that I mean, almost like I'm just suddenly Buddhism has just popped into my head. I wasn't going to say that, but but Joseph Campbell also brings this up. The what you know, the guy Power of Myth, Hero with 10,000 Faces, which talks about belief systems all around the world, and that women, particularly in the Garden of Eden, the woman was basically punished for taking the apple to get knowledge, and the snake was demonized as evil. Snakes all around the world are about snakes and serpents are about survival of the humans it symbolizes so many things. So I think on the practical level, that everything you've said correct, but to break out of this is a huge mind shift of what people have been indoctrinated to about property, everything being property, 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 including women's bodies and children and DNA. So I posted a link to Mona Jackson, who's a Maori lawyer. Well, I mean, he's passed now, but he clearly points out Maori law regarding rape of women, who he points out the systems of law where Anglo law or English law, the woman is regarded or was originally regarded as the property of a man, and it's the man that should be compensated. So I guess what I'm just wanted to say in there is to say violence against women is seen as violence against the land.
Yeah.
And people are, and that's Ukraine is about that. Buying of Greenland is about that. It's all about property and grabbing through military prowess. The arms
Well,
industry.
I think I agree with you entirely that, you know, that's about greed and taking over and power and control and who can do. And, you know, one of the things I mentioned early on about patriarchy being spread, you know, throughout the world, when they actually try to introduce it with the native people of Canada, trying to encourage the men, you know, I remember the Jesuits, I think it was telling the native men that, you know, they don't allow the women to have so much freedom as they seem to be giving the women freedom to do things, and the men the native men try to impose control over their women, and they just simply picked up the things and left them. You know, they wouldn't tolerate it. I think it's true that, you know,
Thank you
many of
very
the
much on that
hunter,
point. I'll have to
yes,
take control now because we've got another report to come.
yes, okay.
So
Oh
thank you
yes, I
very much.
forgot that,
Thank you for
please.
all the interesting questions. And Ozzy, my colleague, are you available? Are you there? Did you start give us the report you've got for us?
Hi. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Luke. And that's very, very interesting. And we've also got something else we've got to put on the agenda. That's why I've got to cut you short right there.
We come back again. Yeah.
Yes, Ozzy.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm really humbled by the two incredible presentations. Francisco, as always, I enjoy listening to him present a very global complex situation in a clear and concise way. And that really deep topic that Luke, championed, and the rich, incredibly rich discussion on that followed. So I don't want to take away from that. So I'll be really, really short, Frank. Please forgive me. Just to say that Trinidad and Tobago is expected to have a general elections in 2025. Constitutionally, it's due by August, but you can get an extension of 3 months. So constitutionally, it could be between August and November. But because we have the Westminster system, a prime minister can call a snap elections. The party that we represent, the MSG, announced since the 14th of January that it will not be contesting the general elections. And then we had this very strange development where the current prime minister said that he's going to resign and he's going to hand over the prime ministership to the current Minister of Energy, Stuart Young, which is creating a bit of constitutional concern, as in effect, he'll be handing over the prime ministership to someone that has never, quite happened before. So faced with this situation, the progressive labor movement had to make a decision. What do we do? Do we sit it out? We can't, because we have already taken a position that there has to be a change in government. And it is after long debate and discussions, it was decided that Labour would actually put up 2 candidates for 2 seats. When I say Labour, organized Labour. And we have subsequently decided on 2 comrades. One of our vice president of our union, he will fight 1.4 seat, which is a stronghold of the current government. And then we have a Clyde Elder, former Secretary General of the Communication Workers Union. He will fight another stronghold of the government called an area called La Brea. And we will fight those 2 seats under the current opposition party symbol, that is the United National Congress. So that is where we are, very interesting times. The prime minister has subsequently announced on Thursday last week Wednesday, I can't recall, that he will officially be stepping down as prime minister and I guess as political leader of the PNM on the 16th of March. So in a few weeks, Trinidad will have this very unusual situation of a prime minister that has been more or less selected by the party, and in particular the current prime minister. So we'll see how that is going to unfold. So that's it. As I said, I want to keep it short, just to give comrades the sense that we will be sending 2 comrades on a mission to fight 2 seats under the opposition United National Congress. Okay, I don't want to take away from the other 2 incredible presentation. So I'm done there. Yeah.
Yeah, we are called the Caribbean Solidarity, Ozzy. So that is also something we're very interested in. Okay.
And we cannot be very pleased that you put in an appearance with all that steel band knocking around your ears.
That
fine music. So thank you very much.
Okay,
yes, no problem.
Yeah,
I mean, I'll always do my best and commit to CLS. I mean, you guys have always been supporting us, the progressive movement in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is deeply appreciated. So
Thank you very much.
No, it's
Now,
mutual.
from time to time as we go on, we we come across some very, very bad news. If you notice, Denot is not with us here today. And the reason for that is that one of our members, his wife, has passed. And we'd like to send our condolences to Dennis. What I'll do, I'll pass you over to Jean Tate, who will fill you in on the details. Okay, Jean.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah. Last Thursday, Constance Quabener's wife passed away. She'd been ill for a very long time, and Quabener had been nursing her at home throughout all that time, except for some periods in hospital and at a hospice. I'll just read out the message that he sent on Thursday, the day that she died. Even the most beautiful thing has to come to an end. Our beautiful mother, grandmother, and wife, Constance, has transitioned. She passed this morning, and her body is at peace and her spirit is free. We will let everyone know of the arrangements for the funeral. The family are requesting donations to St. Christopher's Hospice and the Progressive Supranuclear Palsy Association, and there will be details about that to follow. And this is the condition that she was suffering from, which is very rare. It was quite difficult to diagnose. But I think we should send a strong message of condolence to Frank. Sorry, not to Frank, to Quabener, and to Constance and the family as well, because he was very, very stalwart in his care for her, and it was very moving to see them together over the last few years. He took her to many, many activities, social, political, and all sorts of things together. He made sure all the time that she knew what was going on, involved her in things, in spite of the fact that a lot of the time she couldn't speak and she was in a very, very bad condition. But it was actually always a pleasure to be with them because of the relationship they had and the way that they were able to relate to people. So yes, as soon as we have details about the funeral and so on, and further details about if you want to send any donations, or maybe CLS itself could send a donation when we get more details about how to do that, we could do that.
Thank you, Jean. Cecil? You muted.
Okay. Following on that announcement, permit me to draw people's attention to the passing of a remarkable sister called Gerlin Bean, who lived here for a long time and did wonderful community work here and in Zimbabwe and in Jamaica before coming back here a year or two or three ago. I knew her from the 70s, voluntarily and otherwise, working in community work in Brixton, and she was with us on the editorial committee of the Black Liberator, a remarkable sister. Her laying to rest is on the 11th of this month. I don't have details to pass on of that, but just to recognize her passing and to mention the quality of her life and work.
Thank you. Yep, I'm sure everyone here will send their condolences, and it's really shocked me. I've seen Denot around Quabina, around the place, and it's something I've got used to. Seeing him and his wife at demonstrations, etc. And it's nerve-wracking. Well, anybody with any other reports, any notices of intending? We've got 2 minutes. I could tell you about GAC's Sunday International Session, which starts at 4 o'clock or really 5 to 7. but the first hour is usually taken up with reports. And you can, I've got the, oh yeah, joining instructions. If anyone's got a pen, 906-317-7486, and the password is SIS001. Antoine?
Yes, maybe Steve could announce that Friends of the Earth Grenada is organizing a webinar to mark the UN International Date for the Elimination of Racism or Racial Discrimination, sorry, in association with 21 Days Against Racism from Brazil. So Steve would be the moderator. So probably he could just announce it.
Yeah, we'll put that out on board. Yep. Well, thank you everyone for coming to this our meeting. We hope that we'll see you in the next one. Do you have any what's the topic for the next meeting, Steve?
It's gonna be about I'm gonna say something about the historic debt that the French government and banks forced on Haiti, and how that hindered any kind of development of the country. And Bernard Cord will then go on to speak about the role of debt and neocolonialism in the modern world. So I'll take a historical look at it, and he'll take a more modern update.
There you go. That sounds like something very interesting. Hope to see you all next month, first Sunday of the month. So thank you all.
Okay. Thank you.
Don't forget the 19th
Thank
of
you for
March.
sharing.
Yeah.
Good
Thank
stuff.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you
Bye.
next month.
Thanks, Francisco.
Have a wonderful
Bye-bye.
week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.